Good evening, everyone. Thanks for making it out tonight. Let's go ahead and get started. Has everyone had a chance to review the agenda? Okay. Do we have any recommendations? Do I have a recommendation or a motion to carry the agenda forward?
So moved.
Okay, and a second?
I'll second.
Okay, and all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Have we had a chance to review the minutes? Okay. Do I have a motion to adopt the minutes as written?
Motion to adopt.
And then a second?
Second.
And then all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Public comment acknowledgement. Has everyone, we got, I think about 4 public comments this week. Has everybody had a chance to review them? And does anybody have any comments? I believe we had a letter from an arborist regarding the trees on the Shoemaker property. We had somebody wanting pickleball. We had a letter regarding kind of discussing whether or not we should, should we have the sports complex or should we have a more natural environment? Those were some of the key pieces for that one. And then we had a letter regarding connectivity for the 2 parks. Would anybody like to comment or discuss any of those 4 comments? Jim?
I think the whole question of 2 parks is really rather silly unless we're going to put a fence right through the middle of the whole complex. I mean, it's 2 separate pieces of property at the moment, but it's all going to be 1 park. And looking at it any other way is really kind of silly on our part.
Okay, yeah. Makes sense. Anyone else want to add to that? All right, any other comment regarding the public comments? Okay, let's move on. Tonight we have Chris Nagelsbach here. He is the city engineer. So as we have our discussions tonight, since we are nearing the end, I know there has been a lot of questions about environmental studies, cut-fill balance, and so I just asked that he was present tonight so that we could have any of the questions that came up during our discussions kind of answered. If he was able to answer it, he's our person. So thank you so much for making it out tonight. All right, tonight we're going to start with our council update. I think by and large it went really well. Before the city council meeting, there was a work session with the school board and the city council where they were discussing and inclusion, and they were discussing sports fields and recreation. And I just thought it was just a fantastic start. And especially we have been discussing this for a while, so it was really nice to see this process begin. And there is going to be a second meeting that is specific to sports field and recreations coming up in the next few weeks. I do not have a date yet. So I just thought that was really great to see. Things are just happening there. Is there a date yet? No. Okay. So going through some of the biggest recap, I was able to present on the critical root zone of the Shoemaker trees, and the city they were definitely like understood the relationship between the trees and how the road would impact the trees and how it essentially is now put in the middle of our park. And we did learn that we purchased the property. It is within the contract that it is supposed to be a park. So having a road in the middle of it creates some major challenges. I was able to present that there is at this time, we have been unable to find a secondary placement for the dog park. And so that is also a challenge currently if a road does happen, because we don't have an alternative at this time. The city council was presented with the pool data, and it was decided that based off of how we were viewing the pool and how the city results, the pool survey results were presented, that at this time the pool is just taken off the table for the GPAC. We were able, in the work session with the school board, we were talking about the school board and the city were talking about upgrading the current fields that we have. And then Paul was able to step in and discuss turf and lights, or at least turf, and how over time it may actually cost the city a little bit less. So that was also something discussed, not necessarily pertinent to the GPAC, but it was kind of highlighted that it
was highlighted that the initial cost of a field is very expensive and it was a barrier. And I just commented that if you look over time, that the costing actually isn't as much a barrier because there's no fertilizing, there's no watering, there's no cutting, all these other things. And the point is that there's a lot to be learned here, and we can hopefully get past some of these barriers and figure out solutions.
Yes. And so while they're taking a look at all of the existing fields that we have and potentially upgrading them. So it was still highlighted that we still don't have all the fields that we need to have to for our athletes to adequately have adequate space for playing fields, but they're still working on upgrading what we have. And so that discussion has begun. City council was fine with us waiting another cycle or another couple cycles for this grant. So if we decide as a committee that we wanted to take more time to decide what goes in this park, we are able to. They wanted to make sure that we had access to park inventories of not only all the parks, but the amenities that we have in those. I know that right before GPAC started, we were given like an inventory sheet. So I wanted to hear from the GPAC as a whole. Do you guys feel like you had enough information on the other parks that were out there and the availability of the amenities that were out there? Is that something that you guys would like to have? You would like to have more information on that?
That information is also on the trails and parks information that's on the city's website, which I've gone through.
Okay.
Also, the 2017 Park Master Plan has everything that's current, plus some stuff that we have also brought in, like the Chapman area. Right. So that is by far the best resource.
And that is available at the library?
No, it's online, actually.
It's online? Okay.
Yep. It's on the city website.
I would just say, I do think the Parks and Rec committee members did an inventory. We kind of like up, conquered, divided, went and down to like benches and trash cans.
Yes.
Different parks on a spreadsheet. So if you haven't seen that one, for that.
Okay, I can we can send that out. They also wanted to make sure, this was just a comment by one of the counselors, that they wanted to know how we were discussing the amenities that were in the park, and that we weren't only discussing maybe the top amenities that were pointed out within the original survey. So one of the things that I had said was that we were looking at the items that were in the survey and trying to piece out what would be a good fit for the Grabhorn parcel versus what might be ideal for another place. Pickleball's a really great example. There's a lot of people who would really love to see pickleball. But as we've talked, it might be ideal to try to get another tennis court / pickleball court in the middle schools, so they're put together. So I use that as an example. But so those were the main highlights. So overall, a lot of good discussion, and I think a lot of good headway with where we are going. Anybody who was listening in, would you like to add any comments? Any further discussion on that? Perfect. All right, well, let's move on to the Cathead Walk report back.
Yes, well, I'm sorry, one thing. I thought it was great that, you know, after our presentation and then after what Isaac and Yul presented, that the council voted on the pool. That they decided that it was important for us because we have all these moving parts that, you know, we have been trying to juggle everything, and that they decided right then and there that we can make a decision on the pool, which frees us up to not have to worry about it anymore. And I thought that was great.
Yes, yeah. It is nice to just be able to take that off. Absolutely. All right, for the next, the Cathead Walk, Jim, did you want to comment on that? On what your findings were when you and Joel assessed the land?
Yeah, sure. The first time I went over there on my own, I was going off of the diagram that I found on the master park plan. And I had the impression that some of the area inside the curve of the new road was part of the Cathead property. In our meeting, I was told, no, it's all on the outside of the curve. Joel was kind enough to walk back over there with me prior to the city council meeting. And basically what I told the council is that all of that property is not simply near a wetland, it is all wetland habitat. The city's promise not to endanger the wetlands when they annexed that area kind of puts the kibosh on the whole thing, but it's also incredibly expensive if we were even to try to put in a parking lot, to put in a restroom nearby, to provide water for the dog park, to provide suitable grading or land preparation for the dog park. So essentially, Cathead is simply a no-go. It would be ridiculous to pursue it.
Thank you. And I did have that information prior to the city council meeting, and I was able to relay that to the city council. And so that is where the other, the secondary issue, or not secondary, the primary issue is that we have no alternative location for the dog park. So at this time, if we put in a road, we would just be narrowing the dog park to one of the most popular amenities in this entire city. We would just be making it way too small for our citizens.
Absolutely. We would be cutting the large enclosure down by approximately 42% when we need twice the space we've got now, really. What we've got is workable, and we all wish we had more, but we did the best we could with what the city was willing to give us.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
Would anybody like to, any questions or comments regarding the Cathead property?
I'd like to comment before we move on to the 100-year event.
Yes.
So, what I just said about the pool, I think it's great that we know that we had some things that we had to deal with, and this whole thing's been a puzzle, and it's nice that the pool's off the table. And looking at all the work that we've done, I think it's really important to continue to just move forward. I think, committees can kind of get fatigued if we don't continue to move forward. And looking at the road, and Jim has said it many times, it's this linchpin. We can't move forward without figuring out the road. And I'd like to ask the committee, we already saw that the council will take these small bites and say, okay, there's no pool at this time. Okay, fantastic. Well, the stuff that Kara just talked about with the arborist coming and the trees issue, with the covenants of purchase, with the dog park not having a secondary or any other spot, and not only that, the fact that it would be cut in half, the costing where, you know, it's coming out of the same transportation funds that were right now being directed to streets that are going to be improved and sidewalks. I asked our group, is it time now to go to council and say, we recommend to not do the road because of all these issues? And we really know it's important, for instance, to put these fields in, to put these playing fields in. Obviously, we can't do that with the road in the middle of it. So I think it would, myself, being on this committee, if we could get the approval to go forward and say this road is no longer on the table, we can get some stuff done and we can figure out what best to do with this property. If we don't do that soon, we're just going to keep going around in circles. So I asked Kara and Kim and the rest of you, are we ready to go to council and say we recommend that we don't do the road?
Jim, would you like to comment?
Yeah, and no surprise on anybody's part, I imagine. And thank you, Paul. There is an obviously much simpler solution that answers all of the expressed needs for emergency access and whatever, you know, utility improvements. And basically it is to, instead of putting a road through there, fix the existing bridge, bring it up to modern standards, just like they did over on JP West, run your utilities right along with that new bridge, just like they did over on JP West. Don't destroy the park, putting a road through it that takes up a minimum of 100 feet of the entire west side of the park and eliminates essentially any athletic features that we wanted to put in there, like the softball field and the soccer field. And I am wholeheartedly in favor of telling the council, get rid of the, just drop the road. Don't ruin the park with the road. We don't need to. My
Jim. Isaac, did you want to comment on the bridge?
So just a couple things about the bridge. First off, the bridge and that road is all owned by the county. So the city doesn't have the ability to just go out and fix the bridge unilaterally. So that makes it complicated. Second off, I don't know that the Public Works Director would speak on the record because the infrastructure we're talking about is critical infrastructure. But I do know about locations and things, but I do know that the reason that the utilities were going to be placed where they are shown to be placed is for creating redundancy in the system where there currently is none. And when I spoke with Public Works, they were not confident that just upgrading what currently exists would create the redundancy that's needed. If you would like, I'm sure that we can ask the Public Works Director to try to elaborate. I'm not sure that he would.
So Isaac, I'd like to comment on that. Redundancy is important. And what I've heard, you know, Kim and I talked to some people during our sessions about the water issues and pressures and things like that has to get done. And it's been a long time coming. And if it's been such a long time coming, we didn't own that property a year ago. So there had to be someone either working on it or trying to figure it out, or we wouldn't have a solution. The 2020 water plan, which I found online, actually shows the increase to a 12-inch pipe from the Bella Vista reservoirs, and also the redundancies that you're talking about, alternative 1, 2, and 3. And they state that this is the 2020 master plan, water master plan. It goes from Bella Vista reservoirs down Northwest View Terrace to Northwest East View Drive. Now, obviously, these were made before we owned the Grabhorn property, because if we didn't own the property, there was no way we could plan for it. So obviously, if this is such a need, you know, these plans have already been done. So I'm sure there's some other solutions that can be had. And the matter of the fact is that we need to figure out some other solutions because we have this great property. We have a need for the citizens that they want this park. They want their fields and everything else. We can't have a road and fields and everything else without great costs. And some of these things can and will be figured out by the engineers and everybody else that's so smart around here. So there will be some things that we need to figure out again, but ultimately, if you look at what we've been told to do, we've found a lot of these things through our work. And I still think we should go back to the city and say, our recommendation is do not put a road through the park.
On utilities was solely about utilities and not about the road.
Jim, would you like to comment?
Yeah, and quite frankly, I think the county would probably be delighted to give us the bridge. And there is all kinds of funding coming available for exactly this kind of infrastructure improvements, especially things like old out-of-date bridges that need repairing or replacing. It all sounds like excuses to me, quite frankly. And I agree wholeheartedly that the road is the bane of our existence. It is the bane of the park's existence. And we should definitely recommend that another solution be found that does not include destroying the park for a road and infrastructure that can be handled in other means.
Okay. Yes, Joel?
Well, there is some good news on the bridge, on the replacement of the Smith Bridge. Our Senator Johnson was at Monday's meeting with our county officials, Magruder and the assessment was that Senator Johnson is going to push forthwith and put it on the front burner to support a bridge replacement, and the county gave an indication that they are going to move forward as well. And so I think there's a good possibility that this, with the infrastructure money, Jim, you're talking about, that this could happen sooner than later. So this might solve some of those issues. But those are unknowns. But anyway, that's a bit of good news on this.
You, Joel? Okay, do I have additional comments, or would I would love to have people weighing in on that recommendation. Kim?
Yeah, so in viewing the recording of the city council meeting where you had presented and there was discussion of the root system and kind of the easement that needs to happen there, it seemed to me that city council understood that there was, a set of conditions that would dictate that the road needed to deviate from the original plan, and that deviation might not be, then in line with putting sports fields in and other things like that. So it seems to me that city council is kind of also arriving at the place that we are, that the road, this property may not be best suited for a road, or anything that's going to affect that route line. So I would suggest that we just perhaps put forth a recommendation that does not include a road. I would say we maybe don't need to go back to city council to ask for permission to not include a road, that we just move forward with what we think is perhaps the best next move for development of this property.
I would agree. I would say that is our best option. And I would, if we had to design a park with a road going through it, it would be an absolute waste of space. So I would completely agree that we go forward and design a park without that present, so that way we can actually maximize our space and come to a conclusion. And that was also the sentiment that that was the feeling that I got when I was there, was that they were coming to that same conclusion.
I'm curious, is there anyone on the committee that disagrees?
Yes, I would absolutely love to hear any, for the sake of, we need to have those conversations. Okay. All right. Well, good. Well, let's move on from there. Let's go to the 100-year event. So I was able to, Kim and I were working on a document. It was requested that we present, we at least have kind of some of our current conclusions to be available for presentation at the city booth at the Centennial. Something that would be different than what was presented, kind of the next step after the public forum. And so Kim and I created that document with some of kind of where we are at now. Some of the findings, the discoveries that we've made along the way, and the conclusions that we were coming to, and also some secondary kind of things that we have discovered. So I had asked for some feedback. I got a couple pieces of feedback, but I didn't hear from everybody. So I would love to have comment at this time on the document, and if there's anything that people want adapted or changed.
Mike, Kara, you and I communicated on that, and I filled, I let Paul and Joel know about it because I forgot to reply all. I think it's important. We're right back to the road again.
Yeah.
But I think it's very important that the committee's recognition of the fact that a road through that area is going to eliminate a minimum of 100 feet from the existing park area has to be noted, and the effect it's going to have on the park has to be noted.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I mean, I think that the arborist had said 50 feet. But anyway, like if it's a 20-foot road, we're looking at anywhere from 50 feet to, like, that road could potentially be anywhere from 50 feet in to 90 feet in, and that is a big chunk.
The plan, the existing plan shows an area reserved for the road 50 feet wide.
50 feet wide. Okay. Okay. Yes. So I think that information is.
We're talking a minimum of 100 feet.
Right. Okay.
I think we could reflect that in the primary lessons learned. I guess the point of this is to just point out the facts, not necessarily draw the conclusions. But I think we point out the kind of new distance and reference to the trees, that will allow people to draw their own conclusions.
Perfect. Do you mind kind of updating that in the doc? Thank you. Any other comments, discussions? Oh, Isaac.
I probably need final documents by Tuesday of next week at the latest.
Perfect. I will have it for you. All right. Well, let's move on. Perfect. We've got 30 minutes for our final discussion of the night. So we are kind of approaching, we are approaching our final visits. And so we have received a lot of information. There's a couple of things that are currently happening right now that I feel may warrant us taking a little bit more time for this information. So one of the biggest things that is currently happening is the city council meeting with the school district regarding fields. Now, one thing that we already know, without a doubt, is we do not have enough fields. However, with this new information and us looking at what fields are available, are there fields that we have now that we can update? And if we're looking at fields as a whole, and we want to know, are there more optimal places for fields, like additional places for a softball field right next to an already existing softball field? My thoughts are I would like to have a bit more information before we make our final recommendation. But I don't want to stop this process and run the risk of, if there are not better options, us not being able to put a field in this place. With that, we also have the discussions of this being close to the wetlands. We have the trees. We have the cut-fill balance questions. And so Kim and I had come up with a potential recommendation that we wanted to discuss tonight. And that would be that we send a formal recommendation to the City Council soon that we would like to have an engineering and environmental impacts be conducted to determine if the Grabhorn parcel is suitable for sports fields and determine what the cut-fill balance will ultimately be. And in the meantime, we work on low impact amenities that can go in this area, such as a trail, learn more about ADA and nature, nature-focused playgrounds, discuss signage opportunities. Also, at the same time, the City Council would be working with the school board, and we would be learning more about field availability, options for turf, options for lights. So that way, if we do end up putting sports fields in this area, we will be able to make the best recommendation for that space. And we will know more about, rather than just putting something there to put something there, making sure that we are putting the fields there because they are the best place to go. And that we can hopefully get an area where they can get turf and lights, because I feel like, and not just me, many citizens, many people have discussed the need for a better environment for our athletes so that they can play longer through more seasons, and they can play longer into the evening. We wanted to kind of hold out and work on the smaller things while these things were going on, so we could take a little bit more time. Then the plan would be to kind of take a break for a little bit once we have the small details hammered out, and then reconvene once we have some environmental assessments done, once City Council and the school district have had more discussions regarding recreational fields, and then we can make a final, put forward a final plan. So I would love to hear thoughts, comments, questions regarding that suggestion.
And I guess just a little additional background on that is that, you know, I don't think decisions around development of Grabhorn should be made in isolation, right? This is part of a larger network of all of our public assets. And so how do we leverage the assets with the school district? How do we incorporate this into the larger master parks plan, which is slated to kick off here, hopefully in the next couple of months, like the revamp of that. So looking at our total inventories, looking at how this park fits into the total inventories, but in the meantime, looking at how do we make this the most functional that we can at the most low impact and low cost to the community, and then seeing how the community also is interacting with the space over the course of that time. So maybe a 6-month time frame, you know, that we kind of put a pause on this, but continue to make some recommendations before we put a pause on the GPAC, and let all this other work around environmental impacts and that occur, so we can understand also what is reasonable in terms of the functionality of that space.
We still will have a final City Council presentation, or not a final, but a third City Council presentation coming up in September. And so I would like at that point to be able to make recommendations about, like, Nicole had some fantastic questions about signage near the wetlands and near the creek. Like, what kind of things would we like there? There's been talk about having our one of our previous park members, Lindsay Goodwick, who works for Harper's Playground in Portland, come in, and we can discuss ADA playgrounds and what that might look at. And so there is more information that we can take in, and to really provide a more thorough presentation to City Council. So definitely, I want to continue. We have this session, and we have a minimum of one more that we can work on some more of that information, and then possibly set up other meetings where we reconvene just to learn specific things, And then when the studies are done and when we have as much information as possible, then we can officially reconvene and make our decision. Jim?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea to have more concrete information on what's entailed and how it will affect the property to put in playing fields, by all means. And yeah, one of the things that I don't think we've really discussed to a great extent is just how, for example, would you build and put in place the trail along there? Are we talking a gravel trail or a concrete trail or whatever the case may be, and placement of it, that kind of thing. So what you're talking about seems to make quite good sense.
Thank you, Jim. Nicole?
Yeah, I'm all for more fully understanding how the park can serve the community. My question to the committee is, does this jeopardize our ability to apply for this particular grant that we are aiming for? And does it put the matching funds that for the city purchase price at jeopardy as well? Are we, if we move forward with this, are we stepping away from those two options?
Okay, Isaac will speak to that.
So the city has 5 years to use the purchase price of the property as matching funds for the grant. And within that timeline, based on the grant cycles being about a year, and then starting construction and things like that, we do have about a year or two to play with. So we do have done some planning about wanting to make sure that we use that and capture that match towards developing the property. So if we were to extend for some time, it would not drastically impact our ability to do that. But we would still need, and we probably wouldn't want to go much longer than a few more months, or and I don't know how much time you'd recommend, but if we keep it to 6 months or something less than that, we would still be able to have plenty of time to develop a well-rounded grant proposal, apply for the grant, hypothetically get the grant, and then use it as match. So
I would agree. I wouldn't want to go longer than like 3 to 6 months because we have, this has been a big process, but we have also had so much momentum. We've learned so much information. And so I don't want to lose that momentum and have this get lost. So I think to me, it's just stepping back while some other things are happening and then having a time to reconvene.
So I guess the question would be reasonably, what would be the time frame for like a solid engineering assessment or environmental impact assessment about fill balance and kind of all the reshaping of the land that might need to occur for perhaps sports fields or that?
I'm just going to go back really quick too. Just one thing is that at the end of the year, the Parks Committee is going to be developing recommendations to council like they normally do. And so it might be nice to have this wrapped up so that everything kind of go at once to council for assessment of the next budget year. Mm-hmm. If anything's going to be in there, we need to start thinking about that in January, February. As for the assessments, I don't have the foggiest clue. I have never done one. And I don't know how we would begin to look at that. So I can definitely talk with the city manager and our staff and get back to you.
Chris, are you able to weigh in on that?
Yeah, sure. I can help with that a little bit. On a project like this that's led by the city, we would elicit proposals with specific scope criteria for earthwork activity, pavement sections for E.J. Smith Road, trenching, excavation, shoring, groundwater. I wouldn't know if there was going to be a building or not, so I wouldn't hope we want to include foundation recommendations, but maybe that's a component. We'd get proposals back. We'd have to vet them, take them to council, and then approve a contract, and then schedule their work. And once you're once you have a contract with a consultant, it might take a month to get them in their queue. And then they'll want another probably, 2 or 3 weeks to do their work, and then another month or more to do a report. I'll usually submit a draft for review, and then they'd submit a final. So
4 months. Okay. And what information from that perspective would be most helpful, like on our end, like a complete inventory of all the things that we would be considering, or do you need that information at this time?
I mean, generally, a geotech is going to know, sort of what needs to be provided.
Okay.
On a project, I mean, usually if there's a particular load that they have to consider, that'd be, they would want to know that. Want to know like pavement section criteria, which we have in our standards. So, yeah, I mean, they're pretty, really standard sorts of things that they would provide.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. I was wondering, does the city have a cap on the amount of money that the project would need to hire someone, or do you have to solicit for bids?
You mean to hire a consultant?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no. I mean, that we can do. There's some discretionary approvals that can happen to hire a consultant. Mm-hmm. But in this case, we would probably, I don't know if we would take that approach or not. I believe it's around 30,000.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if something that big is budgeted. When we ran the budget, we didn't put pretty much anything in for what's going to happen from here because we didn't know what was going to occur. And we didn't know what kind of things were going to happen. So when council asked for a recommendation on the amenities, we hadn't thought that we would be getting into things like requests for, engineering consultations at this level. So there's not a budget for coming out of this. So something like that is going to take some work to pull off.
Okay, Isaac, I think in this year's budget, we have $150,000 earmarked for Grabhorn. And if this is extended into the next budget year, for any kind of park development, presumably that $150,000 will be available for such engineering and recruitment.
I will say that the timing would be a little out of sequence just because normally you have a schematic plan that they would then, their field work would be based on a plan, at least a schematic layout showing storm ponds, road section, parking areas where you might have a building, where you're going to put, retaining walls, those kinds of things.
Okay.
So they can focus on those areas. So you wouldn't necessarily do geotechnical study before you kind of have a concept.
Okay.
It can be difficult for these consulting firms to know kind of what Chris was saying is what to look at without a plan. If they don't have an idea of what's going to happen there, it's really hard for them to judge the impacts because, we've talked about the one area being used as a pool. Now the pool's off the table and it could be playground or it could be a field or it could be a parking area or it could be any number of things. And each one of those different items has a different impact on what you do to mitigate, what you do to build, construct, and assess. So sometimes without having a plan, some of these engineering, some of the results we would get from these, we would not be able to get without a plan because we don't know what would be going there. So in the floodplain and we put a trail, there's no wait if we decide we were going to put a building or a walking path or a seating for sports, there's going to be a different kind of engineering result from that.
We're just talking about the fields.
My point was
right?
that there is money in the budget for Grabhorn for this current fiscal year. So that was $150,000. So anyway, so there is a pot that could be applied for preliminary engineering for whatever, and then assessments and so forth. So there are some resources available for this current fiscal year.
And this is investigative, right? So it's more of a, we could use this plan and say, here's where we think the fields can go. This is where
Yeah,
it makes sense. So it'd just be more of an investigative looking to see, can we put a field here because is there wetlands? You know, is it
well,
suitable for those functions?
the geotechs don't necessarily look at wetlands. That's a different skill set. So they would.
Chris, this is Nicole. I can speak to that a little bit. I think what the committee is really more interested in is knowing what areas are buildable and where they can put things. And the lowest hanging fruit here really would be to finalize the wetland determination. The Watershed Council has gotten it to a basic level, but the next step is to do the final determination. And that might be more useful to the committee at this point than sending a geotech out to guess at where things might go. That may not be the best use of taxpayer money at this point in the stage in the game.
Yeah, and that makes a lot more sense. Yeah, and if there is a wetland, there's always an opportunity to mitigate it too. So, especially if you've got riparian work going on, part of a creek restoration. So that in and of itself isn't really a deal killer.
Nicole, do you know about how long it would take for that wetland determination to be made or to be finalized?
I do not, but I can find out that information for you. I'm sure if Dana were here, she would be able to let you know just like that. I don't think it's that long. It's just a matter of getting on somebody's schedule and having them have the time to go out there and write the report. It could be a couple weeks. It could be a month.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you.
And then you have to seek concurrence through the state as well.
Okay. Okay.
There's that process too.
Okay. Jim.
Quite frankly, I'm a little baffled here. Hasn't this already been done? I mean, we've got plans, we've got budgeting, we've got all of this information on what the road would have entailed, on where the wetlands barriers are. Where we literally had a completed plan and budgeting. Did they not do this already?
No, they did not do a geotech report or a wetland. They did not do any wetland survey work.
I mean,
sort of a gross, sort of a 1,000-foot elevation concept plan to determine an order of magnitude for park. So the consulting work that would be associated with that, there may have been a consulting budget within the.
It specifically indicated a softball field, a soccer field. Those are the major things that we're considering. It was budgeted. This dig fill ratio has been considered. I mean, it seems like all of this work should have already been done.
The initial conceptual plan was approaching a 10% design, which means 10% of the engineering work is done. So there's with what we were presenting you with, there was 90% of the engineering and technical design work and accounting for things like cut fill and wetland mitigation to still happen before it was finalized for construction. So, kind of along what Chris was saying, the conceptual plan was really meant to be that, and to present something to the public that they could reflect on and comment on, we had to do something. And so some of the work was done and some of it was not. And partly for this reason, which is that now we're here in this room talking about changing a lot of these things. Okay. So it's a way to protect the taxpayer money and make sure we can, use it appropriately.
So I'm not, obviously I've been involved in a lot of these meetings, but are you referring to the cost estimate that was done by 3J Consulting?
I don't remember who the consultants were, but I'm talking about the plan that I saw that included all of the information on the road and constructing the road.
So those are just, that's just AutoCAD line work. I mean, those are just sort of conceptually laid out. There was
it included budgeting. It included
Right.
However, how many tons of fill they were going to put in over the small creek with the culvert. I mean, well, that came later actually, but I don't understand why now we have to reconsider. Is it even possible to put a soccer field or a softball field in there?
I don't think you need to reconsider it. I think
Considering getting to the road.
Those are workable amenities. I mean, pretty much anything you pick can work. It's just a matter of cost, right? So what this plan represented was sort of throwing everything into the blender and then seeing how it lays out and then putting it and finding out in sort of a rough fashion what that cost would be. So that's what they did. The estimate excludes all of those things that we've been talking about, the consultant costs. It doesn't include architectural amenities, landscapings, any furnishings, survey staking, those kinds of things that are, sort of ancillary to all of this, the detailed kind of work. It's just sort of major components of the project were priced out. And then what you would normally do with this is you'd put a big contingency, which they put a 20% contingency. I might have, applied another number for all of that consulting and soft cost stuff.
Okay, ultimately my point is that what we would present would be, if not further along than the existing plan, would certainly not be anything beyond the parameters of the existing plan. And do we need another engineer? Do we need an engineer to come in and say, yeah, you can put a softball field there?
Well,
no, I don't think you do.
No.
I think just really, so I think also another piece that came in was the wetlands determination. And so maybe we don't need a full engineering assessment, but the wetlands determination came in a little bit into this committee. And so we also want to know how does that impact that? How would we like to have fields within the wetlands? And so that's also a piece of it. So that determination is still happening, and they might be two separate pieces.
So,
yeah,
to Jim's
understood
point about the process, essentially what will happen, regardless of what you give the city, whether you give us a partial engineering plan or not, we're still going to have to go back out with that and get an engineer to do another 10% design, just like the one that we presented initially. And from there, that's, again, we're going to put it all, we're going to say, here's the property, here's the amenities, here's kind of where we'd like them. And the engineers are going to go and do their work. And they're going to say, okay, if you're going to do this, here's how much it's going to cost to put a sports field here. And here's what you're going to have to do to mitigate for drainage, for a wetland area, for a blah, 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 blah. And then there's a big back and forth between that initial plan and the city and other consultants to get the detail about some of these things. And so it doesn't matter whether this group hands us another 10% design, we still have to go get one done anyway. So you could hand us 8.5 by 11 sketched out and a list of priorities. You could hand us something more technical with where you'd like placements to be. It's all not immaterial, but also immaterial for what happens next, for what the next steps the city has to do to go from the recommendation to the actual plan.
Understood. So basically, we would be no further behind.
Correct. Doing any kind of engineering like that.
Just like the one that now exists.
Yes, that is correct. No further behind nor further ahead. So.
Exactly. Thank you.
Nicole, is your hand still raised?
Sorry about that.
Oh,
no
that's
further
okay.
questions at this time.
Okay.
The wetlands could affect where the placement of the fields would be.
Yes, and so
that's I think.
Yeah, it's the Watershed Council's position that we'd like to protect the wetlands as much as possible. But to Chris's point, there are mitigation options if the wetlands are impacted.
So I think that having that information, like a final determination in conjunction with the sports field discussions and other potential options, I think it would be helpful to wait, and especially if that determination is going to come in kind of a short time. If it's, a month to 2 months, that could give us a little bit of time to have these other conversations and get that final determination.
I would just say, distilling this conversation, step one, do fields need to go there, right? Like, are there other options in the community to be putting these fields? And then step two, if this is our only option for fields, what is the suitability of the land for these fields? And what would be the associated cost?
Absolutely. And I mean, I think, and to what I spoke to earlier, I don't want to delay this to a point where nothing goes there. That, if this is because limited land or land availability that is appropriate for a sports field is limited in this town. So I think just postponing it to make sure that we are in fact putting something in the best place. I think will be helpful to everybody, because if we put a field in the middle of wetlands, then we are really potentially limiting their play. I know that they have spoken to they will take what they can get, but I mean, I think that if we're having all these conversations, I think we will be doing everyone a favor if we can really make sure that we are putting the best thing in the best location. Okay. So it is 7 o'clock. Do we have any additional comments, discussions before we adjourn tonight? Okay, so for our next meeting, we can kind of create like a little bit more of a sketched out plan of what this would look like if we're not officially ending next session. And then we can also begin to discuss some of the smaller, low impact amenities that can go along the trail, including to Jim's comment, do we want a gravel trail? Do we want those kind of smaller things? Although we do want it accessible. So, Isaac?
On the note of a trail, there was a South Scappoose Creek Trail plan done about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Actually did it as my thesis work. Some of the answers to those questions are in that plan in terms of what kinds of things you can do where in relation to the bank of the creek and some of that information. So that might be a good place to start.
Where can we find that?
I can send it out if you would like.
That would be fantastic. And the parks inventory as well?
From the SPRC?
Yes. Yeah.
And I will see about getting a copy of the park master plan at the library as well.
Perfect.
That was something that was.
Okay, perfect. All right.
The parks master plan is readily available on the city's website. I've been going through it a number of times.
Perfect. There were some people who like to see hard copies of things, so I think in the past hard copies have been requested.
Okay.
All right. All right. Meeting is adjourned. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.